It's interesting how you want to be remembered.
So I asked the question about what I hope the legacy is.
When thinking about your legacy, what are people going to remember about you, about your operation?
It's been an honor to be part of the Simmental family. And like any family, there is a legacy. And to me, the legacy is so important to continue on.
I hope the legacy for the next generation have the passion for our breed that we have spent a lifetime building.
When we talk about Wilf Davis, that's a whole different story altogether. He was a gentleman, great cattleman, good judge of cattle and people. Uh, he was a good friend, and I met him just because I went to Bar 5. And of course, he was the manager, and I was the help. But he treated me with respect. And I think we got along really well. In fact, I know we did because we had a lasting relationship and with the fishing and the friendship after he'd left, after we both left Bar 5. As far as Wilf, what he was doing for the Simmental business, I think was mostly his popularity in the business and the respect he had. People listened to him. And most of his ideas were probably very good for the times. And he never had bad things to say about anybody. And it was so positive that people attracted to him and asked for his advice, and he was always giving it. After you give Wilf some advice, he would say, "I thank you for your advice, but I think I'll do it my way." And that's pretty much the way he was. We got into an argument one time about a show on the show herd. We had a percentage heifer, purebred, that was sharp as a tack, very clean fronted, lots of middle, lots of everything. She was super good. But we also had a full blood. She was pure white except for a bunch of spots on her. More white than red. And I said, "Well, we're going to take 20 head to Toronto." I said, "Can't we leave her out? Because I've only got 2 guys." And I said, "I don't want to spend every morning in the wash rack with this white heifer." "Well, she's pretty good." "Well, I know, but I said, I can win with the red heifer too." "Well, she's a full blood." "Yeah, I know, but she's going to take a lot of looking after." And then it came. "I thank you for your advice, but I think I'll do it my way." So we rode that white bugger all to fall, AgX, Toronto, Agribition. And she was junior champion at every place we went. So I didn't really say anything, but somebody had to go to the wash rack every morning. I'm sure that heifer went to the bathroom every morning and then laid in it before you could get it off out of the straw. So we spent a lot of time washing her, but I guess we got it done. He was different, and he was everything to everybody. So no bad words to say about Wilf, and we became good friends afterwards. I got to tell you the story about Wilf and Scotty. Now, Mrs. Jackson was a neighbor. In fact, her son Freddie worked at Bar 5 quite often. But we bought this land adjoining Mrs. Jackson's. And Wilf had never met her. I had. And so he come over and said, "Can you come with me and we'll go over and see Mrs. Jackson?" He says, "Because we want to bulldoze that bush out and put in a new fence line." And we like to tell her that we were doing it and see if it was all right. And I said, "Sure." So I jumped in and we go over to see Mrs. Jackson. Now, Wilf, he never let the kids have even a cat. And he didn't like dogs. So we pull up in front of the yard, and I was driving. I get out of the car, and I'm walking up to the sidewalk, and Mrs. Jackson comes out the door. And here comes Scotty, Border Collie. He runs past me and grabs Wilf by the ankle. So they had quite a laugh over that. Mrs. Jackson come out. She said, I've never ever seen Scotty do that. But I said, he's the only one he'll ever bite. So anyway, we had a pretty good chuckle, and she was glad we come over and told her, and we built the fence line. That was fence line right where Neil Moffat lives now.
I have a Wilf memory. When I was fortunate enough to be asked to go up to fish, I guess I have two memories. And so anyway, we packed up the truck and we headed up to Wekusko Falls and met Marnie and Wilf. And so they put they put Glenn in a different boat with another friend. And Wilf and Marnie took me out. We went out to this one spot, and this beautiful lake. Anyway, we dropped the line in, and I guess I was fishing. I don't know. Wilf's telling me, okay, do this, jig a little bit. And so he said, well, you're not catching anything. And Wilf always, because he felt like he was the tour guide, you should be catching something. So he said, well, just roll up your line here and we'll go over to where Jack and Glenn are sitting. Okay. So I roll up my line. I said, geez, Wilf, I think I have something on here. Because the rod started to bend a bit. Well, here he pulled it up and I had a master angler walleye. And I said, and that day I did not appreciate it. As the fishing progressed, the next few days I appreciated it. I assumed that you just dropped your line in the water and right away you're going to have a master angler. Anyway, I found that wasn't true. So then the next year we went up, and now Wilf had relaxed his policy on his on what could come into the boat, let's say. So we were out fishing with Marnie and Wilf, and Glenn was catching some jackfish, some northern pike, and they really put up a good fight, and that's what I wanted, was a little tussle. So Wilf takes Glenn's rod or his hook off and gives it to me. So anyway, then I end up catching a nice sized northern pike. Glenn was a little bit upset, but anyway, that Wilf catered to me. But Wilf was just always such a gentleman. He was just a kind person.
First time I met Wilf was coming to work the second bar fight bull sale. Wilf and John Draper were the two people that I noticed they're different. They made a good team, but Wilf was quiet. When he talked, people wanted to listen. He's knowledgeable, very knowledgeable in the Simmentals and in cattle in general, and he could talk with confidence. Then in my coming back to Canada and working at Klondike Farms for 12 years, and the close proximity that Klondike Farms had with Bar 5 Simmentals, and the fact that I took the show cattle over to Bar 5 to wash them because Klondike Farms didn't have a wash rack. Well, I would end up running into Wilf from time to time, and he was always willing to talk and always asking about what was going on in your life and everything. But then I ended up working at Bar 5, and that's when I got to know Wilf better. And I worked. Wilf became a friend first. Then Wilf became my boss next, and then actually I became Wilf's boss. As he backed down from his role at Bar 5, and I took over his role. And then we worked together. Whether it be picture taking or building a catalog. But then after retirement, after I left Bar 5 and he retired, we got to fishing. I found out that I liked fishing. And he definitely loved fishing. And the time we spent in that boat, you'd think, well, you can only talk so much about the past, and that's right. But at the same time, we talked about different things, like, and we could go on he went with me on an 8-hour trip down to South Dakota to look at a Hereford bull I was thinking about buying semen on. We talked the whole way down there, we talked the whole way back, and not a lot of it was about cattle, but we talked. We always seemed to be able to find something to talk about. And I think that's when you know you've got a good friendship is when you found someone that you can talk with, you can talk to, and all. But in the end, he was my mentor, and that was the important thing in my life was when he became my mentor. I was asked to go down and do a presentation at a field day in North Carolina, not about bar five, but about Simmentals, and Simmentals coming to North America. And that's when I found out the role that Wilf played in Simmentals coming over here to North America. A lot of us know Wilf as sales and marketing part of Bar Five, but before Bar Five was founded, there was a group of guys. I won't rattle their names off, but there's more than the 5 Bar Five owners. Bob Gordon for sure was part of it. But anyway, they were looking at importing some Simmental cattle. Wilf Davis was the person. I think he's working for the Manitoba government at the time, but he was the person that they contacted to go with them to do the selection. And I don't know how many trips he made over to Europe. He selected cattle from Germany, Austria, Switzerland, France. I can't even tell you the names of the first ones they imported and everything. But keep in mind when they were importing them, they had to import calves. They couldn't import older animals because they had to be in quarantine for 30 days. So it wasn't a carefree deal to import animals from over in Europe. There was certainly risk involved, and Wilf was part of that group that took that risk, but also took on the responsibility of selecting genetics and everything. Individuals that in the end founded the Simmental breed in North America. The thing that I find unique about Wilf, and it goes back to a memory that spans over. I'd have to do my arithmetic, but it spanned over a period of about 14 years or so. But when I was a kid, I went to Kansas City, turned 16. Didn't have my driver's license more than 2 weeks. I went to Kansas City, took my brother's heifer and my Hereford heifer. And when I got home, my brother wanted to know, well, what'd you see? What'd you see? And I said, there is this group of Hereford cattle in a string from Montana, and they're like nothing I've ever seen. And he said, what was the outfit's name? I said, it was Beartooth Ranches. So anyway, we'll leave that spot and we'll move ahead. That bull that Wilf rode 8 hours with me down to South Dakota to look at. Because I was thinking buying semen. Well, we looked at the bull, we looked at the guy's cow herd, we looked at the bull's daughters, and then the guy wanted to take us to the truck stop and buy us dinner, so we did. And so we're sitting there, and he asked Wilf. He said, "Well, what's your involvement in Herefords?" And he said, "Well, my dad and uncle, they used to raise Herefords, and." The guy says, well, what was their name? He says, oh, it was Oakland Ridge Farms, Herefords. And I'd heard that name for quite a while. I mean, that was a well-known name in the Herefords. And it was also the name or the prefix that was on some of those cattle that was in that show string, back in the 70s. That Beartooth Ranch had showed. So anyway, needless to say, on our drive home, I had something to talk about. The 8 hours we talked about Wilf's involvement in the Hereford breed. I knew he's involved in it because he had selected cattle for Glenkirk Farms and selected some national champions for Glenkirk Farms from Canadian breeders. But I didn't realize that his family had actually bred some cattle that had made themselves known through the United States. But and I had even used some of Wilf's genetics in my own herd and all. But that was certainly quite the find to find out that Wilf had touched my life way back when I was 16 years old, just through the cattle that his dad and his uncle had bred. But that's my Wilf story.
I guess my favorite memory of Wilf would be just the amount of knowledge that Wilf had of the Simmental breed, and the many people throughout the whole world that knew Wilf Davis, and how many people he helped throughout his years, and we're so grateful that the help that we received from Wilf. And I looked up to Wilf as a dad, so he was one great man.
Yeah, Wilf. I guess Wilf was probably as good a mentor as far as anybody. I mean, he knew cattle. He always had a clipboard and a list on it. And when we sorted cattle in the spring, I mean, Wilf was always organized. I mean, he. I guess one thing when we had our sales in Brandon, people would, commercial guys would come and here's 120 bulls there. I mean, how do you pick a bull, when you're not following genetics or whatever? And I mean, Wilf was a master at asking the guy what kind of cattle he had, how much money you want to spend. Wilf would put a list together of half a dozen bulls, so the guy could go in there and not be, overwhelmed so much. And 9 times out of 10, they would buy a bull that Wilf suggested. I mean, he was a master at planning. And one thing I always had to admire is when we sorted cows in the spring for our breeding pastures and that, we'd have mud and crap flying everywhere, and Wilf would have his clipboard. And at the end of the day, when he left the pen, he never had any crap on him at all, and we'd be all covered. I don't know how that all happened, but Wilf was a master at that. He's just such a likable guy, and I mean, everybody knew him. And when Wilf walked in the room, I don't think you had to introduce him to anybody. Everybody kind of knew him. So young people need to look up to people like that because they had so much to give. I mean, Wilf was just a giver. If you ask a question, he had an answer. And he was a remarkable man, really. He really was. Because I mean, nothing seemed to ever be too much for him. I mean, if he had something to be done, he just got it done somehow. I mean, I mean, I was so lucky to have him. I mean, I'm sure I wouldn't be what I am today if I hadn't had guys like Wilf and John and Mac around me. I mean, I'm supposed to tell a good story about Wilf, but Wilf, I trimmed a lot of feed at Bar 5, and Wilf, one time we had, Old Dutch was an import bull, and he was kind of a half a killer because he come out of corn. He was an import bull, and most of the import bulls didn't like too much. But Wilf was going to show us how to trim feet one day, and we got Big Dutch on the stocks, those old stocks. I mean, I don't know if anybody ever knew what stocks were, but we got him. I don't know how we got him on the stocks for one thing, but we did. Anyway, Wilf he liked to use those great big long handled nippers instead of a grinder or small nippers, and he wasn't happy till he seen blood. So by the time he got done trimming Big Dutch's feet, I'm not sure if he was bleeding on all 8 toes, but he was probably bleeding on 7 of them. And when he went to get him off, Dutch was going to kill us all. But when he hit the gravel with his newly trimmed feet, he couldn't even walk, so that saved us all. But I never did try to trim a bull like that again. That once was enough for me.
Wilf Davis was a very special friend of mine. Met Wilf back, I don't know, in probably the 70s. We met Wilf, and always remember going to the Bar 5 sales. And Wilf, I mean, we were just little operators, and Wilf treated us like gold. Like, he'd come and talk to us. And I mean, we were nobodies, and he was a people's person, and it didn't matter who you were. And that's kind of when I first started to get to know Wilf. he when he left Bar 5 originally, he kind of had a consulting business, and we hired him as a consultant, and he made feed rations for us and suggestions, and then later he was back at Bar 5 again, working there for a lot of years, and me and Wilf got to be really good friends, and then he started taking my pictures, or bull sale pictures and sensational pictures. He probably done that for 25 years, and the last year he did it, he was 84 years old, and he was way better shape than I was, and he was just one of a kind. Wilf was a great ambassador for Simmental breed. He, like I said before, he didn't matter who you were, he would talk to you and that. And he done so much for the breed, and promoting, and like Bar 5. Also, the Simmental breed was kind of Bar 5 at one time, and he was him and John Draper were great promoters, and he done a lot for the breed, and he sat on boards and give ideas to people. And so Wilf was a very dear friend of mine, and we talked like year round. We talked all the time. Probably in the summertime we talked every couple of weeks. In the fall and the female season and the bull season, we talked pretty every day, because he looked at catalogs. I just can't believe that a man was that interested at his age. So Wilf had actually a very lot to do in my life, and he was such a great friend, and he gave me such advice for years, and I respected that man so much. And he he was Wilf, and Wilf, things I remember about Wilf, and one of the things I really remember about him, Wilf was a very distinguished looking man, but I always remember his cowboy hat, and he always wore it with a little tilt, and he done that all his life, and that's one of the things that I'll always remember about him. And he worked, and not just taking his pictures. Marnie was a big part too. She created our website, and they worked together. And one of the things too with Wilf was, I learned very, very soon in my life, you don't phone Wilf at 7 in the morning, but don't worry about phoning him at midnight. He wasn't a morning person, but they were both nighthawks. And I always found that funny, and we talked, lots, and I miss him dearly. And Wilf was in my favorite contacts, and I'll never take it out of there. And I would just wish I could have one more call with Wilf, but he was a very, very special man. As far as memories of Wilf, I've got a lot of memories of Wilf. Of me and him traveling some together, and when he was taking pictures here, we always had lots of memory. And we'd get done taking pictures about 4:30 because of the light, and we always had to have a scotch and a drink after. And we only had one drink, but he'd ask. He didn't have to offer it to him. He just asked, and we always had that. And that was kind of a special memory of him. And he in Wilf's own way, he was funny. And I can always remember one time I was on the phone, and I was wanting to buy a heifer, and I hadn't seen her, so I sent him and to buy this heifer. And I really liked this heifer in the picture and video and stuff. And Wilf was at the sale, and we're bidding like 20,000, 21,000 or something. And he said, no, that's enough. He said, that's a lot of money for a heifer. Like, Wilf was the kind of guy that you'd swear he was spending, that he was writing the checks when he was buying something for me. He was pretty cautious all the time, but yeah, that would be one of the memories. And I ended up buying a son out of that particular heifer that he told me to stop on for $30-some thousand. I was kind of wishing maybe I had bought the heifer.
Over history, there's many people that have influenced the breed, and I think that Wilf Davis is one that'll always be a legend in the Simmental breed in Manitoba, and a valuable, lots of valuable memories. My first association with Wilf Davis, and I was a young producer then, was my dad and Wilf Davis were very involved in Bar 5. So we had seen him lots of times and were involved with them through the Bar 5 program. As years went on, he became an extremely important family friend and a mentor to us.
So for me, again, it would be through Bar 5 in the early years at some of the great Bar 5 sales. I was one of the guys that helped out working, and that's where I'd first met Wilf. Where I got to know him really well. I worked for Bar 5 one year. We showed at the Toronto Royal, and Wilf was down there. And at Agribition, I roomed with him for the week, so that I really got to meet him there. And we just over the years became really good friends. I think he appreciated our cattle. That's why we were asked. He was the one that asked us into the Stockman's bull sale to sell a few bulls. And then just over the years, we just maintained that friendship. He was a very good mentor to us.
Wilf was a very personable person, and he had lots of knowledge. And as young producers, it was always good to have Wilf as a resource. Whether you had a question about a Simmental cattle or you had a question about something about breeding cattle, Wilf was always willing to give you some advice or say, here, this is who you should talk to. So he was the kind of person that you enjoyed visiting with. He was very close to my family, and so we talked lots about different aspects of our breeding program. He was always there when you had a question, and always wanting to talk to you.
I think everyone knows Wilf's impact to the breed, like going to select cattle and that stuff. You've probably heard lots from people. Where Wilf impacted me, he was always a gentleman.
Yeah, I think one of my greatest memories of Wilf was every year, just before the bull sale, Wilf would come out about a month before the bull sale, and he'd go through every bull one by one and just analyze them, give us any ideas of things we could improve or whatever. But it was just heartwarming for us to think that he would take his time and come out and spend an hour or half a day with us, and just enjoyed his friendship and his knowledge.
My memories of Wilf Davis are long standing, I guess. I first ran into him at a sale in Saskatoon in the summertime. I was looking at this one bred heifer, and I don't know, I might have been 18 or 19 years old. Didn't have a lot of jingle in my jeans. Didn't have a lot of money to play with, but really liked this one bred heifer. And with that, was standing along the ringside with this good-looking gentleman with a cowboy hat, cocked a little bit, named Wilf Davis. And anyways, I was bidding on this heifer, and I went to $4,200 or something like that. And that was a lot of money for me at the time. A lot of money for any kid at that time. And this guy leans over, he said, "Son," in his baritone voice like Wilf had, "son, I wouldn't quit on her yet." Anyways, that was cool. Got the heifer bought, $4,500. And proud as could be, nervous as heck. Calved her out. She was calving a little bit later. I think she had an April bull. And anyways, grew him out. He was worth keeping and whatever, but couldn't sell him as a yearling because he was just too young. So with that, off we go to the Regina Bull Sale a year later. So it had to be 79, I think, because he was, this bull was an M. So that'd be 1980. And 2 years later, Regina Bull Sale Junior Champion Bull. And guess who buys the bull? Bar 5. Yeah, his name was Spruce Grove Lad 16M. So it was pretty coincidental, I guess, or I don't know what you call it. But Wilf advised me to buy her. Bar 5 ended up owning the first calf. And I think it was $7,000 that we got out of that bull. So it's a pretty cool story. But the thing that I remember about Wilf, and I was very honored to be one of the eulogists at his service, at his memorial. Thing about him was he was solid. He was solid, trustworthy. When he said something, people listened. He had respect and never afraid from that in any way. He's one of the guys in the cattle business that I will always have total respect for. Yeah, Wilf's story is a all-encompassing one within the breed and the industry, I guess. From his time as part of Transcon, he was in sales management. He was part of Bar 5 once or twice with different owners. His influence, I would say, when I look back at the old Bar 5 days of the Drapers and Wilf and Moffat and people like that, Wilf was probably the commercial contact guy of that crew, as much as anyone, for sure. And he had that credibility and reputation of the go-to guy. When he had his own consulting business, photography, videos, and things like that, he continued that right to the end. And I know Barry Labatt was one of the benefactors and a great friend of Wilf's. But beyond that, Wilf just did tremendous service. And of course, Marnie was there to help things along. They were a great team. And we miss him. Wilf's one of those guys that people talk about with respect, and for all the things that he's done within the beef industry, not just Simmental. Wilf was top of the list for being genuine and genuinely wanting to help people, and his integrity, without a doubt. There's a lot of people that still try to operate on a handshake in business dealings and whatever. That crowd's getting a lot smaller. Sorry, but that's true. And but Wilf was one that you could take his handshake and put it in the bank.